We've got two really super speakers to start this day of exciting talks that we've got in store. Dr. Gary Savage, on the end there, is the headmaster of Westminster School, so has possibly had the shortest journey of any of us this morning. Westminster's a day and boarding school, hitherto only taking girls in the sixth form, but moving to full co-education from September 2026. No stranger to academics himself, Dr. Savage got a double first from Cambridge, doesn't get much better than that, and then a PhD. And as master in college at Eton, he was in charge of the King's Scholars there, then spent some time as headmaster down at Allanes in southeast London before coming back to Westminster, where he'd previously done a stint as undermaster in 2020. So welcome, Gary. Thank you for being here. Emma Goldsmith has been head of the Dragon School in Oxford since 2021, which is a co-ed prep school taking boys and girls from 4 to 13 and then sending them on to Oxford day schools and the most prestigious boarding schools in the land, including, I think, the odd one to Westminster. So we've got a nice, neat pathway there. The Dragons get lots of scholarships and awards to their future schools, 83 last year, I think, which tops even Westminster's Oxbridge entry last year, which continues to be the best in the land, or the best in the independent school land, I should say. So Emma and Gary together know very well what it's like to go to academic schools and to identify children that would thrive at academic schools. Emma working at that prep school end, helping parents to identify whether a highly academic school is right for their child, and then Gary getting them on the other side of all those exams and watching them hopefully thrive as they move up to 18 at Westminster. I thought we'd start by unpicking that term academic a little bit, because it's a word we use loads about schools to describe, or somewhere's academic, somewhere's not so academic, somewhere's getting more academic. You've got the obvious metrics of really good exam results and lots of children going off to the right universities, but what else do you think that word means, and what makes an academic school? Gary, should we start with you?
Sorry about that, Gary. Over to you.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, and I wish I'd had a longer walk to think about it in advance. But as you say, it's a 2-minute walk. And in case you're wondering, the noise has nothing to do with Westminster. That's the Westminster City Council. The playing fields out there, for those who don't know, are Westminster's playing fields, and our sports centre is literally just behind us here. So I am on home turf, which should give me the confidence to answer that difficult question. I'm not sure it does. I think an academic institution, an academic school, is above all about a state of mind. I think that if you put in one building, one institution, very clever, bright, curious, interested and interesting children and staff, and you put them in that building together, and they share an attitude towards academic work, the life of the mind, curiosity. If you share those values, rigor, taking the life of the mind seriously, and always wondering not what is the answer, but what is the next question, that I think is a truly academic institution, one that is committed to extending the boundaries of knowledge and understanding. That, to me, is what makes the difference between an academic school and a school. And there are lots of different schools, and they're all great, but an academic one should have that quality.
It's a really interesting one, because obviously we prepare children for the right school for them, and we are totally non-selective. Which, everyone says, well, how do you get so many scholarships? How do you get children into these highly academic schools? And it is about attitude. And I think if you're at the beginning of the journey for your children, choosing the prep school that is going to give them an environment where they're going to be challenged to be curious, challenged to think outside the box. I mean, we very much say we want to develop free thinkers. And if you think about the bombardment of information that your children have through all sorts of different medium, to have that critical thinking mind is so important. And I'm sure when Gary's interviewing, or the team are interviewing children, they want children who are interesting. They want children who are going to have really exciting, thought-provoking answers to the questions that they're asked in interview. And that's my word of caution, that if you are ambitious for your child and think that they could really thrive in a school like Westminster, please don't tutor them. Because tutoring saps the life out of your children. A, they're exhausted because you're having to fit it around everything that they do. And B, you're crushing that creativity if you're not careful. So my advice would be to actually don't worry about the over-tutoring, but put them in an outstanding prep school, like the Dragon, and where they're going to have that real mix and variety and opportunity for them to really think about the thinker that they are, and therefore the right school for them when they make the choice at 13.
Thank you. How old will your child be before you start to realise as a parent that perhaps they do demonstrate this curiosity and this sort of thirst for knowledge that, you know, the question askers, as you say? And, well, it is one for you, Emma, but actually also, Gary, you know, from next September, you're going to be having 4-year-olds showing up, aren't you? And how old, therefore, do you look at your 1 or 2-year-old and think, you know, that's a Westminster boy?
Oh, Lord. Can I just tell a quick story? And this is absolutely true, that I did have a set of parents who arrived with a baby in arms. And I said, well, you know, what are your thoughts about education? What are you looking for? And they were going, yes, we would like the Dragon, Eton, Oxford, Goldman Sachs. And I was thinking, my goodness, this child can't even, hold a spoon yet. So I think, there's one thing about don't write your child's story. Give them that rich environment. And the great thing about the early years foundation stage, which obviously Westminster are going to be stepping their toe into, in fact, it's the most brilliant foundation stage where it's all based around independent learning and children choosing what to do. So I would say, realistically, I think probably towards 7 is where you start to see aptitudes developing, where you think this is really interesting. This child is thirsty. And it comes back to what Gary was saying about attitude. They've got that real curiosity about wanting to know more. They've got that really, that mind that wants to join dots together. So I would say probably about 7.
Yeah, absolutely that, at whatever age group. I mean, we had 4-year-olds joining us at Allane's, so I'm used to that. And you can, there's a sparkle somewhere, there's a spark. It might be independence of mind. It might be asking questions. You can sort of tell. It's very hard to define, unfortunately, until they get a bit older, when it's easier. I mean, I've been interviewing children for senior schools for almost 30 years, and on the tutoring point, there's nothing wrong with a little bit, occasionally, well, maybe there's something wrong, but there's not, I think I can understand why a little bit of strategic tutoring, if your son or daughter might be particularly struggling with a particular subject, whether it's maths or whether it's English or whether it's Latin, whatever it might be. But blanket tutoring is deadly. And the best children I've ever interviewed, to all the schools that I've been part of, the best candidates at interview are authentic. And I must say, I do think that's why our children do continue to excel at the most competitive universities in the world, because my children, as they leave us, they're authentically academic, they're authentically intellectual. We don't tell them what to say, they're not drilled. As tutored children can be, they are given the wherewithal to explore their own ideas, to have their own opinions, to express them, and as I said, to keep asking questions. And that impresses me as a secondary head looking to recruit children, and it certainly impresses universities who are seeking children who will be fun to have in a tutorial, not just automata, or who just ask, tell me what the answer is, but actually challenging the teacher or the tutor and together exploring what the next question might be. That is the essence of being truly academic.
Just coming back to the idea about an academic school, I think, there's a danger of thinking academic is literally being in a classroom, with books and knowledge and what have you, but that creativity that's so important to get a child's, the agility of the mind being developed. And, if you're going to be an engineer or anything, you've got to have that creative and imaginative streak. And so when looking for a school that's really going to meet your child's sort of intellectual needs, make sure that there is that creativity and extracurricular input as well, because that is so important about that balance between the skills that they're developing.
But that's so interesting about the skills, and actually your example that I think we've all seen of the mum with the bump who's thinking Goldman Sachs probably, but one of the things we were wondering the other day when we were talking about this was, how do highly academic schools also nurture that creativity and the soft skills which employers are looking for at the other end? And how do you get that balance of real intellectual academic rigor and also thinking about what it's like to be out there in the real world and not surrounded by others who are of that caliber and with that ambition?
It's a critical question. I mean, and goodness, so many ways. What Westminster does is not untypical of good schools. We all, I think, do this. We have extensive co-curricula. So on the first point, whether it's sport over there or behind me here in the sports centre, whether it's drama, whether it's art, whether it's music, all of those ways are ways of developing not only skills and passions, but soft skills as well. I was interviewing yesterday some of the children who are going to be the kind of captains of the school leadership team, and exploring with them their sense of what is leadership. The examples they all chose were examples from the co-curriculum. Maybe they directed a play. We had a bilingual play in Mandarin and English last month, Thunderstorm, this great Chinese classic from the 1930s. One of the girls talked about her experiences of being in that, in learning about taking people with her and fostering enthusiasm and dealing with challenges. Another boy used an example of being on the river down at Putney and having to dig deep and help others to dig deep because he was the cox getting ready for the National Schools Regatta, etc. So it's the co-curriculum that helps do that. In terms of getting out of the bubble, I mean, getting out of the bubble is a real challenge if you're an independent fee-paying school for very bright children. There are multiple layers of bubble there. So encouraging all of the children, and they don't need much encouragement, to get out there, to be involved in the community, to do community work, volunteering work, charity work, that helps. Talking to and having partnerships with other schools, including our close neighbours Harris Westminster, helps. There are all sorts of ways that help, but above all, again, it's a mindset. You need to encourage them to be curious about the wider world, not just within the comfort of their own particular social, intellectual, academic circle. And that's a role for schools, to encourage that, to build on what hopefully is coming from parents, an open-mindedness and a compassion and an empathy for all sorts of people out there, not just people like us.
And it's also that sense of purpose. You know, when you are in that kind of school, what is the purpose of you kind of extending your thinking and so on? And that comes through to as schools in Westminster, and we do that sort of social entrepreneurship kind of development, that understanding of social impact, and how you can use all the skills that we're developing in these children, and making sure that the school is going to nurture that sense of purpose in life.
Sorry to go back to something a bit more humdrum, but all these children need to get in somehow. And the question which parents always ask us is, does a child have to be an academic all-rounder to go to a school like Westminster? Or could they be brilliant at one thing and slightly less brilliant at another? And I think the example that's always rolled out is, do you have to be a brilliant mathematician, but it's sort of okay if you're not so good on the English side? Or do you have to be right up there across? And I think that also applies to CAT scores, which I'm sure lots of parents in this room are familiar with or soon will be. Do your CAT scores have to be consistently very high, or can they be a little bit wonky? And what kind of CAT scores, dare I say it, are Westminster and its ilk looking for?
So we don't. Well, CAT scores are not a formal part of our admissions process at all. We use the ISCB pretest, but our criteria are comprehensive. We talk to the prep school. It's very, very important. We look at references. We do look at the ISAB scores. We do our own tests, and ultimately we interview as well. And we're looking for children who will be a good fit. Now, in terms of the prep schools, know that as a sort of baseline, if you're at a school that does CATs, a school like Westminster, you're looking at 125 plus, and below that is not realistic. But you can certainly be wonky. I remember when I used to interview children for King's Scholarships at Eton, when I was the Master in College there, I was all for wonky children. You could be brilliant mathematicians, and that's it, or brilliant linguists, and that's fine. Don't expect everyone to be a universal genius. I mean, not everyone can be Leibniz. But there's a sort of a baseline which would enable them to flourish in a fast-paced school like Westminster, and the best guide to parents for whether your child is a good fit for any school is to talk to the prep school.
I was going to say, and that's what we spend, that's why it's called a preparatory school, because what we're doing is preparing children for the next stage. And obviously at our school, we have 140 children in our year 8, and we feed into 36 different schools. So we are very much familiar with this idea of having to kind of match the child and the school. And there's a narrative. So yes, you do have the CAT scores, but there's a narrative behind that. And it may be that perhaps your children have only been with us for a couple of years, and we can see that there is a road, because some of these children are very young. They might be taking the ISCB pre-test in year 6. And for the prep school to be saying, look, we can see the potential is there. Their scores are a bit wonky, but we can see when you get to that golden moment when their sort of emotional intelligence kind of comes in line with their cognitive ability, you're in that wonderful sweet spot. But every child is on a journey, and a lot of the schools are looking for potential, and that's where the assessment days are and the interviews are so important, because that's where, verbally your child might be brilliant and they can see that it's a great fit. They look at the CATs and go, oh, that's a bit wonky. And it's for the prep schools to say, yes, but this child, the potential you're seeing is reality, and they are going to come good in a couple of years when you're going to get them in year 9, and we're going to work on that. So it's very important, that relationship between the prep school and the senior schools.
And what about coming away from the data? A child who's got additional either educational needs or emotional, social needs. How do those extra support requirements play out in both the admissions process, but also their experience once they get to a highly academic school?
Well, certainly. At Westminster, and again, like all good schools, we welcome children with learning differences. I always have my Senkos around the table who may have met some of those children and can then make sure that our admissions are contextual. We take into account family circumstances, school. Obviously, we admit children from primary schools as well as prep schools. We admit children who pay the full fees. We admit children who might get a means-tested bursary and pay no fees at all. Some of them have learning differences. Some of them have interesting stories. All of that is part of a properly comprehensive, holistic admissions process. And no one who feels they could flourish at a school like mine should feel that they shouldn't apply.
And a word of advice, I hope, is please be transparent. Parents often ask me, should I reveal the fact that they've got a diagnosis, or even that we think there might be a profile but it hasn't quite come to fruition? Please be absolutely transparent with us and the senior schools, because then we can support, then we can actually make sure that the pathway is the right one in terms of the admissions process. And I have to say, it's brilliant that there is so much more known about learning differences. I can think of, people at the beginning of my career who clearly I now look back and go, they definitely had needs that weren't being met. And so, please do champion your child if they have a difference, because we are so much better equipped to understand your children and make those provisions, which, from a teaching and learning point of view is fantastic that we're now so much more embracing and much more knowledgeable about how to support.
And what about stress levels and anxiety, both again in terms of the admissions process, which is pretty ruthless when you look at the numbers. I know that at very academic schools try to make it as pleasant experience as possible for the young people, but it is very competitive. Do you, and then also once those children are there, and the inevitable competition and perhaps anxiety that comes out of those high expectations, how do you manage, and how can parents help to manage the stress levels at home, and what can you do at school to make sure that those children aren't struggling with anxiety and stress?
Do you want to talk about 11 plus, and then I'll talk about...
Yeah, stress comes from parents, I'm afraid, because, and I speak as a parent of 4 children, I think it's really important, the children will put pressure on themselves, and I'll talk a little bit about, children who might have anxiety, but I think as parents, being as boring as you can, putting it into, it's not the end of the world. All they can do is their best. And actually, if they don't get in, it's not the right school for them. And I think as long as you can be consistently and don't put any pressure on them at all, they will perform much better, because children at the age that they're taking these tests want to please you as well. They want to do it because you've put them in that situation. And because mummy will be so disappointed if I don't get in. So even have those conversations when the children have gone to bed. But the more you can just be normal and just say, do your best. Trust the school to support them, the prep school or the primary school they're at, to support them. But please don't put any further pressure on them. If you do have an anxious child about it, there are lots of ways in which you can help them. And, talk to the senior school that they're going to and say, look, they are a little bit anxious about this. And these people are professional at dealing with the whole process, and trust the senior school to manage the process really well. But just if you can remain as relaxed as possible, it really does help the children.
And these are environments with high expectations. That a lot of the high expectations come from the children themselves, which can be compounded by parents or can be mitigated by parents. So please try to be the latter. We try to be the latter, certainly. That's why, Westminster is a boarding school as well as a day school, so we run on a boarding school rhythm. So we have Tuesday afternoons and Thursday afternoons are devoted to sport, games, play rehearsals, music rehearsals, that kind of thing. It's not relentlessly academic. There's a Saturday morning school to make that possible. So that's a way that you alleviate stress. We also have a brilliant team of housemasters, counsellors, chaplains, Senko and her team, all sorts of groups of people who are there to help manage stress when it emerges. But above all, the messages I try to give as a head, and I'm sure Emma's the same, is to encourage the children to live in the moment, to enjoy every day as it comes, to enjoy their friendships, to enjoy, in my case, walking around the gorgeous environment of Westminster, not to always be thinking about the interview at Goldman Sachs that may be some years away. That is not healthy, and we discourage it all the time. They're children, and we want them to remember that and to feel nurtured and loved as children with potential, to be sure, with many gifts, but they're still children.
I couldn't agree more. And the age at which they're taking these tests, they should be playing. Making sure that there is plenty of time for playing with other children, being outside. So important to have that balance in their lives.
And I suppose coming on from that, if you can see that you've got a very bright child or a child who's showing curiosity or aptitude, do you think it's necessary to put a very bright child in a highly academic school? Or are there some very bright children out there who might do the same or better, depending on what metrics I guess we're looking at, in a slightly less academic school where perhaps there are bigger fish in a smaller pond?
That's a really interesting question. It comes back to what's an academic school, but it all comes down to the individual child. And I can certainly say that there have been children where they have been highly able and have that really high academic profile, that in conversation with parents, we have come to the conclusion they would be better in a more all-round school, because perhaps they had a tendency towards perfectionism, and putting them into an environment where maybe they would be constantly seeking to be the best, constantly seeking to make sure everything was perfect. Actually being in an environment whereby the challenges would maybe come from different aspects of the school, and they would have much more of an opportunity to have the experience of the co-curricular and the breadth of that. So it does come down to the individual child, but certainly any child who has that ability and has that aptitude for excellence will do really well in whatever school. And we must remember the schools that we're talking about, they are outstanding at teaching and learning, so the child will be stretched and challenged to achieve their potential.
Yeah, it's definitely, parents will know or should know, in combination talking to prep school or primary school head, what will suit their particular child, and it is quite individual. Certainly a good academic school need not and should not be overly competitive. I discourage that, certainly. I want the children to be collaborative, and a lot of what we do in the classroom is about teamwork and collaboration. You're certainly not in competition. What you're trying to do is to develop your potential. Always have high expectations of yourself, but not trying to prevail over somebody else. That's not, in my view, healthy, and I don't think it's how it should be. Speaking personally, I went to a comprehensive, and it was good school, great teachers. I occasionally felt either inhibited because the pace of the classes I was in was not the pace I wanted it to be, and because I was a bit naive, I kind of made that clear, probably through my body language or what I said, it sometimes had a bit of a hard time. For someone who wants to go fast and who wants to really enjoy academic work, a school like mine is a really good environment because the kids don't get at each other for being bright or interested. That's almost seen as, well, yeah, that's what you do at a school like Westminster. You are bright and you are interested. That's a great environment for a certain child, but maybe not for every child. And again, we're back then to knowing your child, talking to your prep school and working out what's the best fit.
Really interesting. I went to a big comprehensive school as well. Yeah, there you go. There's a story there, isn't there? But just come out, interestingly, I was at an event yesterday at a highly selective boys' school and talking to some old dragons, so children who've been with us. And I said, what is the sort of academic environment like? And they said, Ma, we just do lots of talking. And I thought that was really interesting because they weren't seeing academic as, I've done really well in my exams. They said, Ma, the debating society, we go in and we listen to lectures at the other, and they're learning through that kind of collaboration and really kind of motivated by the context that they're in. So it comes back to the fact that actually it's what's the environment rather than what results do they get at the end, but what's the learning environment like for those children, where they're going to thrive.
Sounds great. Sounds like such fun. Just lastly, and I think this is something, well, I'd be really interested to hear both of your thoughts on this, but probably, Gary, it's more for you. Your previous job at Allane's, they've obviously now taken on what was Northbridge House in Hampstead and are opening a new Allane's north of the river. Just last week, KCS in Wimbledon said that they were going to be going co-ed all the way through, having previously, just like Westminster, only had girls in the sixth form. It feels like there's more and more co-ed. The landscape is going co-ed, clearly. More opportunities perhaps for girls in London than there were previously, and I don't know how the numbers will actually pan out with that. There's a lot of change going on at the moment. How does that affect the landscape of highly academic schools when you look around London? Do you think there are more opportunities for very bright kids in London now than there were? Do you think things are broadening, or I don't know?
Yeah, I think they probably are. You've mentioned one or two initiatives, and there are other schools that are opening, aren't there? And they're different kinds of schools with different approaches. They have different price points, and I think the more options, I guess, parents have to try and find the best fit for their child can only be a good thing. Westminster's decision to go co-ed, I have to take that entirely on my shoulders. When I interviewed to come back to Westminster in 2019-20, I said to the governors, this is what I want to do, because I was convinced it was the right thing for my school, for Westminster, at that point their school, to do it after 50 years of having girls in the sixth form. So, and I'm really pleased that we're doing that. But I think it's great that parents are going to continue to have choices, because whilst many children flourish in a co-ed environment, some flourish in a single-sex environment. I know that. I spent the first 10 years of my career at Eton. So I would never sit here and say it's my way or the highway. It's an absolute nonsense. It's back to parents knowing their children, talking to their prep school and working out what's the best fit. These are all wonderful schools. They do things in a slightly different way. There are different fields, different kind of textures, and coming to visit them and get a sense of that is important as well. But ultimately, the more choice there is must be a good thing, because every child is different and everyone will find their own route to fulfilment.
And it was interesting, talking to these ODs last night at a boys' school, I said, how did you make that transition from a co-ed prep school into it? And they said, didn't really notice. And I think that's a great credit to the school, because actually being all boys isn't actually the thing. It's actually the culture of the school that allows it to be very open and inclusive.
We've got to talk actually shortly about co-ed versus single sex, the age-old million-dollar question. So you can come back and explore that in greater depth a little bit later. We've got a few minutes now for any questions from the audience to these two very wise heads. I think I need to come to you with my microphone, so I'm going to be lazy and come to the front first, if that's okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a bit about the tutoring point you guys raised earlier. Are you saying don't tutor specifically for interviews, but do tutor for academic need, or don't tutor like blanket?
May I just answer that very much? I think the first thing we've got to be very clear about with tutoring is, as Gary rightly said, if your child needs confidence in a certain area or just needs that extra help, absolutely do give them that support. But I think whole tutor regime is totally unregulated. There's no mechanism whereby tutoring is actually inspected or anything like that. So be very cautious with tutoring, because often what we find is a parent will come and say, oh, the tutor says that, they're not doing enough of this at school. Well, perhaps they're doing that so they might get more sessions and more money. So, I think it's working with your school and saying, do you think they would benefit from some tutoring in particular areas? And we will always support that. I think, please don't coach them for interview. I would just genuinely say the authentic children, if they need some help, maybe just get sort of a family friend to kind of have conversation. And actually the best possible preparation for interview is just them being used to talking to adults, anybody, in a very natural and an informative way, and have things to talk about. So that's the most important thing. So I think that's really the context in which I would talk about tutoring.
Yeah, completely that, especially on the interview point. It needs to be authentic. So any opportunity children have to talk to family members, friends, and not all families are the same, and it's not every family can sit around the table in the evening and have dinner and have a chat. I know that, but any opportunity that a child has, whatever their context, to talk and to articulate their ideas authentically and naturally, that is the best preparation for an interview. Because if they're naturally curious and if they're used to expressing their opinions and are at ease with adults, a really good conversation will flow. Whereas if you tutor them to it, they'll turn up, they'll fix you with a firm eye and a firm handshake and say absolutely to every question and talk about their love of the complete works of Philip Larkin, none of which they will have actually read, and it's pretty unsatisfactory, above all for them.
Yeah.
So authenticity is the name of the game.
Absolutely. And what happens if they have been tutored, they spend their time going, what was I supposed to say with the answer to that question? You don't get the freshness, and we want the freshness. You want characters, you want individuals.
If you've got a child who's already in an academic through school, what kind of conversations would a school like Westminster have with that school? For example, if they don't go to a prep school, they don't go to a state primary, but they go to a normal, an academic through school where they will be offered a place. What interest would that school have in, say, recommending the child to a school like Westminster? Because you're potentially poaching a really good student from that school.
I mean, I must say, schools tend to be professional and put the child at the centre of their conversation. So if parents express, when I was at Allains, we would have children sometimes who would come to Allains for year 7 and 8 with a place at Westminster, for example, that they would then proceed to. And what we used to respect was when there was honesty about that from all parties, and we then put the child at the centre of the process, did the best job that we could for that child, knowing that they were then going to go on to a school that the parents thought would be an even better fit for them from the age of 13. That was fine. Absolutely fine. I just think, I don't know what you think about it at the prep level, but I think transparency with the child's interests at the heart of the process doesn't really go wrong if you do.
It really doesn't. And, all of these places, the children are the most important thing. And so every conversation we have is what's the best thing for that child? So I think you have to trust the process in that environment, saying if you really don't feel the senior school, they're not going to want you if you don't feel it's going to be the right place for their child. So I think you have to trust the professionalism. And we all came into education to benefit those children that we have the privilege to care for. So, the context of that. So never be afraid of having that conversation that you think, actually, it doesn't quite fit, I think.
I'm afraid we don't have time for any more questions, but we've got the whole day here. We, myself and my Good Schools Guide colleagues will be down on our stand if you've got anything else that you want to follow up with us. Perhaps I know that Emma and the Dragon have a stall here today as well, so you can go and ask any further questions of them there. I suspect Gary's going back to his desk, which is fair enough. We understand. Can you please join me in thanking them both for giving up their time, though, to speak to us this morning?